take this back to headquarters.
Welcome to Verdun, Corporal. Welcome to the Indiana Jones universe, the podcast that explores the incredible adventures of the world's greatest globe-trotting archaeologist, Indiana Jones. Each episode is a casual and somewhat humorous, opinionated conversation with a slightly sophisticated analytical study of the expanded universe content from the Indiana Jones franchise. You can expect to find discussions about the adventures of young Indiana Jones, the further adventures of Indiana Jones comic books, the Staff of Kings and Emperor's Tomb video games, the Indiana Jones novels, the original soundtracks, and so much more. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Jones Universe podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and today we are continuing our exclusive interview series to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which includes behind-the-scenes conversations with some of the talented filmmakers who contributed to this phenomenal television series. For part two, we are joined by one of the renowned directors who worked with George Lucas on Young Indy. He was responsible for directing two terrific episodes set in France, Verdun in 1916 and Paris 1908. So without further ado, our very special guest today is none other than Mr. René Manzor. Welcome.
All right, so let's get started. To begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did your film career begin, and how did that ultimately lead to your role on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Well, I was born of a French father and a Uruguayan mother. I've always been, I've always had like one foot on the old continent and one on the new. A childhood that I spent in suitcases, that gave me very early the desire, the need even, to tell stories. I first satisfied this need through the cinema, with feature films such as Le Passage, which I wrote and directed at 25. This film was a huge success in Europe, and then, it led me to a second feature, Dial Code Santa Claus, aka Deadly Games in the States, which won several awards. And then I was lucky enough that these films were appreciated by Steven Spielberg, who invited me to Hollywood to work on a project. And as for the Young Indy adventure, it all came about thanks to Kathleen Kennedy. They had liked Diet Code Santa Claus a lot at Amblin, and Spielberg had even seen it 3 times with his kids,
That's really cool. I guess that leads into this. I mean, before production began, what were your initial conversations like with George Lucas and Rick McCallum and anyone else involved, and how well did your creative vision align with their ideas?
Actually, that's kind of a funny behind-the-scenes story, because Rick McCallum called me from Barcelona, where he was working on the episode directed by Terry Jones, Barcelona 1917.
Wow.
He asked me if I could go to see them. And so I went to meet George Lucas and Rick in Barcelona for lunch. I was living at the States at the time. So George had his arm in a cast at the time because he had just fallen somewhere. And of course, I was a big fan of the man and of his work, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and I expected him to talk about the series. But in fact, we never even approached the subject. And I didn't see, what that had to do with anything. And I started to think, incredible, those guys that just brought me to Barcelona to talk about the First World War and the Cubist art, But it was a very pleasant conversation, having been a painter myself. Painting was a subject that I knew well, and history was one of my passions. So I felt fairly comfortable. But even so, I was wondering when they were going to get to the point, But in fact, they left it at that. I flew back from Barcelona, happy because I had met George Lucas, but a little lost. When I got home, I found a message from my agent telling me that they wanted me to direct two episodes. The first was on the Battle of Verdun, and the second one, in which Indy meets Picasso. So I realized at that point that I had been put through a sort of exam, something like that.
Well, that's incredible. And, everybody I talk to who, has met George Lucas, throughout their career says something similar, that he's just a great storyteller and very down to earth. And then, that's interesting that ironically enough, you were being told about the show in that way. And that kind of leads me to my next question here, because the original concept for this series was to use it as a teaching tool, right, to educate students about historical events. And was that challenging for you to sort of differentiate it from the Indiana Jones films that you knew?
Well, challenging, yes, yes, but who doesn't want that kind of challenge? The initial idea was to hire film directors, and ideally one for each country that the series visited. That was George basically main plan. He wanted a Chinese director for China, an Egyptian director for Egypt, etc. The idea was to have someone who is a feeling for the country and who knew its history well. After the first dailies, I had a call from George to talk about the footage that I had shot. The amazing thing with George is his sheer presence, even when he's far away in San Francisco, he's a very modest man, but he nonetheless manages to say things, to get them across and analyze your work as a director. All of a sudden, you have a producer, but there is a genuine exchange. He understands what you're going through. He understands what you're trying to do. He also reminds you of the general approach of the series as a whole and how your small piece of work fits in. He also urges you not to attempt to be too spectacular. That's the big difference, between the Indiana Jones trilogy and the series. For George, the series had to be first and foremost educational. The mistake that we directors were continually making was to have the Spielberg films in mind. George and Rick didn't allow that to confine them. Even if Paramount and ABC were expecting some kind of spectacle from the show, George's vision went much further.
On the subject of George Lucas, he also wanted to, create a television series that experimented with his new digital filmmaking techniques. So, as a director, what challenges and benefits came from taking this approach?
This had to do with the way the show was actually designed in terms of even its schedule. When I arrived in Prague, I met with the crew of British technicians because, the key members of the crew were British and, the rest were local. So when I arrived there, the technicians, they had followed the whole production of the series. Each time the directors provided kind of new blood, we are the fresh horses. They had different demands, the directors, and they also had different work methods. This meant that the crew never fell into a rut. I met some amazing people. There. Rick McCallum, first of all, who has remained a close friend. I remember the first day on the set, when I arrived on the set, because, everybody was calling me the kid. I was the youngest. And so when I arrived on the set and I discovered the list of directors who had been hired, there were names like Terry Jones, Simon Windsor, Nicholas Roeg, Billy August, nothing but famous, international directors. No Americans, by the way. And I started to freak out a little. Rick noticed this right away. When I arrived, he took me aside and asked me what was wrong. And I said to him, look at the director's list, that's what's wrong. The last name on the list, my name, it's just not possible. And he said, very calmly, George drew up that list, René. He's the one who put your name on it. So if George trusts you, don't you think you can do the same?
Wow.
When I heard that, it really bucked me up, just like like had brass balls, at that moment. And Rick is like that, he's like a can of spinach, with him anyone can be the sailorman, but Popeye with him, because having him by your side on the set was definitely a benefit.
Yeah, that must have been really encouraging. Speaking on that list of directors George Lucas had drawn up, it was sort of an unconventional approach, having all these different directors from different countries with their own perspectives. So I guess since they were different for every episode, did your responsibilities change at all compared to previous projects you'd worked on, as a director?
Not really, because actually, even though the budget was very tight, which was kind of a surprise because you game had like a ABC, Paramount, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. You think it's open bar. It was not open bar at all.
Wow.
If I want to summarize, what is the best talent behind the series, is the producer, Rick. It's not a random that then he went into producing the three other Star Wars. The guy was extremely talented. He was on the set, first person on the set with a big smile, last person on the set with a big smile, and he was like helping you. It was like basically a producer for me does the same job as a director has to do with his actors. He has to protect them. So the producer, he has to protect the director from the mess, the politics, and everything that goes on. Because otherwise, the director is going to spend half of his time, if not more, to deal with politics, as opposed to deal with storytelling. And so, half of the talent there is on the episodes, even more than half, is Rick's talent. It was. You would ask the other directors. I guess they will tell you the same.
The amount of, I think, collaboration and the professional relationships that developed out of this show. I mean, we heard something similar last week from Simon Windsor as well. And, especially for you as a director, and maybe Rick McCallum had a similar idea. But, even though Young Indy was a separate project, it was on its own. Were there any specific elements of characterization that you wanted Sean Patrick Flanery to sort of incorporate into each episode to emulate the style of Harrison Ford at a younger age?
Well, a lot of that was basically dealt with by George himself with the screenwriters that worked like 1 year prior to the show, So they had tackled down this, and things were already set up to a good level in terms of the scripts. And George was there behind the scripts. He wrote all the stories and he was working with the screenwriters at Skywalker Ranch. So, he had covered that ground. The only thing that we could do is visually, add some things like little winks, visually to the fans. Like, for example, there is a scene where in Paris 1908 where the kid gets out of this room and, escape, on the roof of Paris and, to go and meet those crazy painters, in Montmartre. And so during that scene, there is a moment where he actually he falls. He falls, and he loses his cap. And for me, I did this as a wink to the audience, like he's trying to retrieve the cap, exactly like Indiana Jones is always obsessed by retrieving his hat, in the films.
Right.
This is the type of thing that we could do, like little winks at the audience, but it was not in the script.
That's really funny because I was actually wondering about that. It really reminded me of that scene in, where Indy goes off the tank, off the cliff, or you think he does, and his hat is just up there, and then he comes back up and he puts his hat on.
Yes.
So I love that nod right there. Well, continuing, Indiana Jones has a certain visual tone. What are the kinds of things that you pay attention to as a director to fit into that tone, and does that ever, come into conflict with your own style?
Well, when I approach a TV series, this one or any other one, I usually say to the producer, give me the other episodes. And if there are too many seasons, give me episodes that you prefer or the one that the audience prefer. And I watch them, I screen them, and I screen them to understand the DNA of the show. So it's not about, it's not like when I'm directing one of my movies. because when I wrote and when I'm writing and directing one of my movies, it's my DNA. But when I work as a director on a TV series, it's George's DNA in order to emphasize that DNA, not to put my own.
Wow.
So the tone, I had, of course, I was a fan of the films and of Spielberg as a director anyway. So, for example, in Verdun, the first shot where you see St. Patrick for the first time, for me, it was very important that this shot would remind the audience who that guy is, because they do not name them at the time. So my camera and this movement that I do, like a tracking shot towards him when he turns and the camera tracks in. And this is one of the Spielberg, famous shots. So by using that as a signature, I was serving the DNA of the mythology, because I was introducing the main character, the hero, using a hero shot, So it's not something that I would do in my movies. It's something that I did for this show, because, that was part of, my job as a director, was to try to tell the story the best way I could, but to try to serve, the creator, which was George Lucas. And Steven also, because he has a stamp on that, trilogy, because of his style, that he brought a tremendous style to it. And so, of course, people, they have that in mind as well. It's also a combination of those two wonderful storytellers. That's what you have to do. You have to try to, with the budget of one day of their shoot, you have to try to do the show like that, to just have the, that element.
Speaking of which, let's get into your first episode that you worked on for this series, which was Verdun 1916. What is so compelling about this episode is just the way Indy witnesses the insanity and unpredictability of war just by simply being a messenger. And I'm curious, why did you decide to characterize Indy in this way? And how did you approach recreating such a monumental battle through this fictitious character?
It's not something that really the director can decide on his own when it's not part of the script. It's that the script was designed to have, kind of a comparison. The difference between what was happening in the castle was the generals, were having dinner and sending, men to slaughter. So the only thing I did then was to emphasize that with my camera work. And this is basically what George Lucas loved most in the episode, is the scenography, the blocking. The way I was using camera moves and movement of the actors combined, like a choreography, to try to find a way to basically bring the idea that there were not poor people and rich people. It was a question of power. Who gives the order and who actually deal with the shit, And so basically the idea is that using St. Patrick, Young Indy, to get from one point to the next, is the link, between those two universes. And he witnesses, and he's like a candid, he's going to see with his youngster eyes what war really is. And he knows that the place where he comes from, there is this moment where he actually looks up and hear people laughing.
Yeah.
While they are eating, they laugh at jokes and stuff. And he's like coming back from war, and his suit is all dirty. Those decisions that we can make on the set. This kind of, go wash yourself. And the guy, he comes back from war, and the other one is perfect in his uniform. So, of course, by doing this or showing this, you emphasize the subject, you emphasize the story, but the story is already there. The real creator here is not myself. The real creator is George Lucas and Jonathan Hensley, the writer, because they actually put that down on paper. And so it is because this is there that basically I can be inspired by just trying to transform that into pictures and sound and expressions and direct the actors and explain to the actors what I feel about the script. Because they have basically inspired me by their work. But I'm just the fruit. I'm not the root. They are the root and the tree. I'm just the fruit.
That's a really great metaphor, I think. I'm curious, since writing your novels, has that given you a greater appreciation for the role that writers play in filmmaking?
Well, I wrote also for other directors, which is kind of interesting because, then you see exactly where your work ends and where you have to give the ball to somebody else and trust also the fact that that somebody else is going to be inspired by your work. So it's very difficult to give that trust. He's forced to, right? Like an actor, the actor is forced to give his trust to a director because it can be fantastic in a take that is not put in the cut.
Right.
So it can be terrible in one take and wonderful in five others, and suddenly the director or the editor or both, they choose the take where he's awful. And so suddenly people say, well, he's really bad. The thing of giving your trust, within that job it's a key to the success of a film. And when I mean success, I'm not talking about box office. Success in terms of the accomplishment, the fact that it's a good movie or a bad movie, It's a collective effort. And the guy who signs at the end, myself, for example, is just the last one. You have to understand that. It's just the last one. So the last one, he has to do his job at the peak. He has to be at his paramount because he has also the responsibility of finishing something where everybody else has put his effort and talent at the paramount.
Well, that's really interesting that you explain this to us in this way. And I think to understand that, at least to me, I think is what separates a good director from a great director. Because you have to have the ability to understand that, creating a film is not just translating what's on the script, but taking it one step further and adding these little details visually to show us these things. Like, for example, the tension between General Nivelle and General Pétain is so palpable and fierce in this episode, right? At least to me, I think there's a strong sense of realism because these scenes feel so historically accurate. So for you, I mean, how do you create such compelling drama from historical fact like this?
As soon as I received the script, they asked me for my comments. George, Rick, they asked me for my comments. You have to understand that this is very special because in Hollywood, it doesn't work that way. In Europe, it's different because we have a different approach. I mean, we used to have a different approach. Today, it's not like that. It's very, very different. The reason I came back from the States to France, I stayed 10 years in the States, work there. It's because I realized that I needed to have the final cut back. I came back to France and to Ireland and to Europe. And suddenly I was having again the responsibility for the creation of what I was telling as a storyteller. My stories, not the stories of somebody else, as I explained, my stories. If they are my stories, I have to have the final cut. Otherwise, it's not my story. Somebody cannot tell me that the story I wrote shouldn't be like that. That's very important. And the way the movie business is changing now is that if you're not your producer, you cannot be a filmmaker. The reason why Scorsese, Spielberg, those kind of movie makers, Ridley Scott, or this, the reason why they are real filmmakers because they produce their film. So they have the final cut. The other ones are just puppets, that make a lot of money, but they're puppets. They are not directors. And so to go back to your question, between the tension between General Nivelle and Pétain, there was permanent desire to involve the director and use all the talents of the people working on the series. All remarks on a dramatic or historical level were welcome. In the Verdun episode, Pétain appeared to be as a hero. I mentioned this to George Lucas very early when I first read the script. I said to him, I understand why the screenplay is like this, because in 1916 it was okay, but you have to keep in mind that in the bookends you have Old Indy coming in. So he knows. Young Indy didn't know, but Old Indy, he knows what I know.
Nice detail.
And so it's a mistake. It's basically the biggest mistake you can do with this show is this one. And maybe the reason why I was hired as a director is to tell you that. And so he looked at me and he said, "Thank you, René." That's what he said. And he had to redo an entire thing. You know, they had spent a year on that. But fuck that. He had to be educational. That was what he had in mind. So he had to just go back to the drawing board and redo the end of the show. You know? And this is the very kind of thing that George likes, because the educational angle was strengthened.
Wow, that's really interesting too that you mentioned this difference between, old Indy and younger Indy in that perspective. And, I'm curious, were you aware of the DVD edits that they made later? And, as a director, did you feel like cutting out old Indy was beneficial to the episodes, or were they not?
I mean, this is not my say, really. I trust them so much that they know why they were doing that, and they are the creator of the show. If today I want to take my first movie and re-edit my first movie, no one has anything to say because I'm the creator of that movie. And today, for me, maybe something don't work. They used to work in the time, but today, no. So I was just hired to do the job. I didn't even shoot actually those scenes with Old Indy. They were done afterwards. They were not done during the time of the shooting. I guess I think it's Carl Schulz. It's Carl Schulz that directed those bookends on my Verdun episode. Old Indy was not part of the schedule we worked on, but even if it was, as George say.
And moving on to a different topic now, another thing that I like visually about this episode is just the set design. I mean, it's marvelous. It has such a strong visual contrast. And, you see these stately French billiard rooms, right? The chateau, these gruesome trenches. And was there a specific artistic look you were going for in this episode? And do you have any behind-the-scenes details to share with us about the locations and sets for this episode?
Okay, when I did the prep, I did the prep with Gavin Bouquet, the production designer, who's a fantastic production designer, and we actually worked first of all on photos and illustrations from the time. He showed me different things that, of course, he had work on his own, but I said to him, "Look, it's a very graphic time, so." Of course, we can have this approach, which is like an approach, art design approach. But actually, the approach that we should have for that is the story we're going to tell. And every single thing that we're going to have to produce as a design has to tell that story. And that story is not the story of the Battle of Verdun. The story is how come 3 people in a castle room can decide for the life of 10,000 people on snapping a finger. How come? Even though there are others, one single man, and it's the power of one single man can decide not anymore. I'm going to destroy that order. I don't want to be the trigger of the gun. Fuck the gun. I will not be the trigger, And so this is basically the theme of Verdun.
Wow.
With Gavin Bouquet, we had to work on to keep that in mind in every single decision. We had a great deal of freedom on Young Indy. We were helped by Rick on the set. So basically, we felt free because we had Rick on the set. He was not over, on the phone. He was with us in the trenches, so to speak. Those episodes were like small films, nothing at all like television. Even though the budgets were very tight, And actually, that came as a surprise because, anyone would think that Paramount ABC would be, Spielberg and Lucas would have rolled out the carpet for us, No, not at all. Everything was extremely well managed, and it was above all extremely well produced series. It was an extremely well produced series. For instance, Rick McCallum had told me, I have to tell you, Rene, that we're going to use stock shots for the Battle of Verdun. I said, what? We're going to use stock shots for the Battle of Verdun. Well, don't react like that. I know that I know you guys. Just look at the footage. It comes from a Oscar winner on the Western Front.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at the work. Okay. And then we'll discuss. I take the tape. I go to the hotel. I just I watch it. And I try to be very open. I try hard. And I look at it. And of course, you have plenty of soldiers. You have like more soldiers than I will have. You have those shots, and they are all high angle shots. High angle shots. But this is not Verdun. Verdun is at the level of the deads. That's where the camera should be, at the level of the deads,
Oh, wow.
And so it's going to be awful like that. And they're going to use that in every single show because they're going to use the same stock shots. So I was mad as hell. And I try not to be because I had to find a way to convince then Rick. So I went there and I said to the first AD, give me the schedule. And there was 1 day of travel. And I said to the first AD, what is this day of travel? Why there is a day of travel? Because we are in Prague, René. And so we need to find a field, for Verdun. I go to the Barandov studio where we were prepping in Prague. And I look at the lot behind the big building, And I look at the lot and I just pull out a compass. And I look at the compass and I see in front of me, I see Prague. On the left, there is a big pillar of electricity. On the right, there is the freeway, bridge. And I go inside and I said to Rick, I need to see you. Can you come with me outside? And he said, René, I'm having lunch. Yes, I know. But it's something urgent and I need you. You're my producer. You can have lunch later. I haven't had lunch. So can you come with me, please? And he said, of course, René, of course, I'm going to come with you. So he gets out and I said, this is Verdun. He said, what? I said, this is Verdun. We're going to shoot Verdun here. And he said, René, are you kidding me? I mean, there is Prague in front of you. There is the pillar over there, and there is the bridge over there. Not to mention the studio just behind us, And I said to him, the studio is north. I never shoot north. It's front light. It's ugly. I'm never going to shoot towards the studio. And he said, of course, yeah, okay. But what about Prague? What about the pillar? What about the highway? I said, put your eye at the level of the deads. We're going to turn, and it was all earth, right? It was not concrete or, it was earth. We're going to turn that upside down. You're going to make trenches here. And so with the ups and downs of the field, the Prague is going to disappear. The highway is going to disappear. Everything's going to disappear because the camera will be where it should be, at the level of the deads, because that's Verdun. And he looked at me and he says, we have 14 days, René. Yes, we do. And we also have 1 day of travel that we don't need to use. And people are paid during that travel. So instead of traveling and spending gas and trucks and everything, we're going to shoot here. Yes, but what about the extras? I need 100. Yeah, 100, but 100 French. No. I need 200 costumes, 100 extras.
Wow.
I'm going to shoot the French side, and then I'm going to change costumes, and I'm going to shoot the German side. And he said, 200 costumes, 200. We shoot here, we shoot here. 1 day, 1 day. He shakes hand. Deal.
Wow.
That's Rick.
Wow, that's an incredible story.
That's Rick. That's Rick. Without picking the phone, calling George, no, that's Rick, because he knows you're gonna use my footage as stock footage. You're gonna use that in other episodes, and they did, and the most craziest thing about it is that when the dailies went there, because George knew. He knew that we were going to use stock footage. He knew George that. And at the time, Kathy Kennedy was visiting, and he said to Kathy, come and see what your little French guy is doing." And he showed her the dailies that are incredible of the battle. At ground level, and it's shot in scene sequence. It's incredible. One day of shooting. And I had John Ward, who was on the Steadicam, running with the soldiers in scene sequences, because I shot with all the explosive rigged. I had Simon Crane, the stunt coordinator of Titanic, Braveheart, you name them. He has done everything. And those guys, they were working exactly with the same passion as if we were doing a short film, because they knew that we were not supposed to shoot that. They knew, because they had a Simon come from England to actually, do the stunts, because the stunts were not part of the schedule. It was not there. So then when you get the call from Kathy saying, "This is incredible, Rick, what you're doing, what you're producing over there is incredible," he gets the credit. But he deserves the credit, because it's thanks to him that I'm able to actually shoot that.
Wow, and that's one of the things that was interesting about this series is, of course, people think of George Lucas, and, he was never a director on this show. He was always a producer, and same with Rick McCallum, too. Now let's talk about another strong scene from this episode, and this is one of my favorites, when Indy's comrades explain to him the causes of World War I during dinner, right? And this is demonstrated, right, with this complicated subject with thinly veiled jokes, right? The baguette representing France and the sausages representing Germany, right? So with a scene like this, how do you balance, a visual concept while also emphasizing the dialogue from a script?
Well, the scene actually is already there on the script again. I'm just giving the credit to the real talent. When I'm reading the script, the scene is there. And I reacted exactly like you are reacting after watching the episode, which is, I say, this is a fantastic way of explaining how this complex war is actually, why is it going on? Which is kind of stupid at the beginning. The way we have to explain that to the audience, since we are educators here more than storytellers. If we want to put ourselves in George Lucas' shoes, we have to be educators with that scene, not storytellers or So it has to be very clear then with the props that we're using and with the shots that we are actually shooting, that this is conveyed to the screen, that what's on paper is conveyed, that the baguette is going to be there and shot and close-up shot, then the tomato, the potatoes, the sausage for Germany, we're going to actually see that in close shot and very close shot, since we are on TV and not on the big screen. So we have to think of that, Yes, it's beautiful for a big screen, but we're on a small screen, so get closer, Get closer, because people need to understand that. It's not just going to be pretty. It has to be, understood by people. It's like we're telling a lesson. We're not telling a story. Then we added up some little pluses, bonuses, like when he talks about Serbia and he has the tomato in hand. Then I asked him to put salt on the tomato and eat the tomato, which was not on the script,
Right. Wow.
to actually see that people are just gaining power over them by eating, So it's emphasizing what's already there. Again, it's not inventing something from scratch, because that's what the writers did, and with George. It's saying, okay, that's what they want to say. Okay, I understand. And now, since I understand, I can emphasize, I can do my job.
Right, and that's I think another interesting thing too. I mean, you talked about I love hearing why certain things are the way they are, right? Like, you mentioned how all of these concepts were already in the script, but then to have you tell the actor to eat the tomato and put the salt in it, like that little change, I think adds so much visually as well. And another phenomenal scene from this episode is, when Indy visits Remy later that night at a church, which has been turned into a hospital for soldiers. And despite how gripping this scene is, I think it's so beautifully shot, right? It's poignant to have this pain and suffering occur in a place of worship. What was your creative vision for this scene?
Well, this is basically my job. The scene on the script was in a hospital. So when I did my research, my personal research, apart from the one that Gavin Bouquet, the production designer, was doing, I did my own. And when I just looked at photos and when I read letters from soldiers on the front, and I realized that the hospitals, people were dying so fast that the hospitals had not place anymore. So they were transforming basically every space available into hospitals. And I saw photos where there was a church, and I went to Rick and said, I want to do that in the church. And so basically we just scouted, and look again, and then the art director, transformed it into what it is. But the idea was basically to fight, and that's my job as a director, when I have a good idea, to fight to convey that to the screen, because I know that whatever the pressure is, at the end of the day, when George is going to look at the dailies, he's going to say, wow, that's fantastic, that's even better.
I liked what you were saying a moment ago about when they were filming that scene with the tomato and everything, how you had him bring the shot closer in, right? So I guess what I'm wondering here is what kinds of differences, like that one, do you consider when you're filming for TV versus the big screen? And, since this series was kind of a bunch of short films, did that make it sort of complicated?
When you use a brush as a painter, you know that you're using the brush for one thing. Is that when you use a tool as a carpenter, you know that you're using that tool for one thing specific. And it's the same, for a filmmaker. We have tools, we have the sets are tools as well, and you have to use the best tool that you need. If you don't have the tool that is the best, you just make a compromise, and you try to get creative because you cannot do the shot that you had in mind. So basically, you have to say to yourself, guess what? I'm going to create a better shot because I cannot do the one that I had in mind. So this is a great opportunity to do a better shot. And that's how basically you finally, get to the point where you are very creative. For example, based on my experience, and each one has one different, the best shot I create, the more original shot, it's at the end of the day when I'm under pressure and that, I just I'm afraid I'm not going to finish the day. So the pressure is really high. And suddenly in that state, I get the best shots.
Wow.
Because I don't do what I had in mind and I create something else based on what I have at hand, and suddenly imagination has to just take over.
Speaking of great shots, Indy's aerial pursuit, when the German biplane is, going after him, he's on the motorcycle. It's a really thrilling action sequence, and it feels a lot like a callback to, Last Crusade, when Indy and his father are driving away from the German airplane. And did this scene heavily rely on stunts and practical effects? And would you say that's one of your strengths as a director?
We had 14 days to shoot each episode. Whatever the episode was, and Verdun had the same number of days in Paris, It was more complicated in terms of action scenes. There were more action scenes in Verdun. Of course, we're talking about the war. We're not talking about painting. So suddenly there was uh, uh, more pressure to actually um, get the action that we needed, because it was the only moment where the action was not just spectacular, but it was educational. Constantly, Rick was reminding us that it was not a TV version of the Spielberg movies. It was something else. So when I read the script of Verdun, I went to Rick and I said, Rick, I'm not going to shoot those action scenes um, soft because it's educational. Have to shoot them wild. I have to shoot them raw, just to show people what war is. That war is not a pretty picture. That war is awful. And if the kids can get that now, maybe we save some lives later.
Wow.
Dang.
And he said to me, absolutely. So we had 14 days, okay? So the production manager we had was David Barron, who's excellent. Many films with Kenneth Branagh, he was his partner and stuff. So David was our production manager. So that we had like incredible talents with us, you know? And then Rick was on the set every day and would leave at the end of the day after the others had gone. So that's the kind of thing that inspires you. You have a genuine partner at your side, and since the budget is very tight, you have to handle a number of compromises. And that's what surprised us when we came, because we thought it was open bar. No, no, no. You have to handle a number of compromises, but the talent, Rick's talent, is that he gives you the choice of what kind of compromise you want to make. Instead of telling you it's going to be like that, it gives you the choice. And he says, for example, René, what do you prefer? That we build Indy's motorbike as it was at the time, with a local stuntman riding it, or to use a Czech motorbike that breaks down 9 times out of 10, but with Eddie Kidd, the world scrambling champion, on it. You decide. Immediately I said, Eddie Kidd. René, the bike is going to fall out over. Yes, but if I get one shot with Eddie Kidd, it's going to be incredible. Okay.
Right.
Okay, because we were the ones who were designing the shots. You know, it sounds so logical, but producers don't do that. Producers generally, they just like look at numbers as opposed to look at the result. So does it mean that Rick didn't look at numbers? Of course he did. He knew that whatever I was choosing, it would cost the same. But he gave me the possibility of choosing one and not the other. And at the end of the day, of course, the motorbike, was out of order, and we did other things while they were repairing the motorbike. We shot something else. Rick turned to me and smiled. It's like, it's your decision. But when Eddie Kidd did that incredible scene with, the plane and chasing the bike and stuff like that, here we are suddenly flirting again with the Indiana Jones trilogy. We're flirting in terms of, designing some action. The only difference is that there is not a popcorn tone in it. It's serious. That the guy can die, that the Fokker plane can kill him, as opposed to in Young Indy there is in the Indiana Jones there is kind of a popcorn good feeling. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be fine. It's another type of tone. And here the tone that George wanted was not the Indiana Jones tone. He wanted a serious tone. We were talking about World War I, so it's not funny.
Yeah, kind of going off that, it's really interesting to see how Indy is just the medium for how George is telling these stories and getting these lessons across. And there's this incredibly gripping, sequence when Indy crawls through no man's land to reach a German bunker, and he overhears this discussion about artillery movement. And then, he quickly evades a German soldier and returns to the trenches. So, how did you create such a strong sense of fear for the audience?
It was um, by following Sean Patrick all the time, you know, following him like when he was like crawling, uh, try to avoid as much as possible wide shots. There are some because at one moment we want to see that the battlefield is filled with dead people, that he's crawling, among dead people. So basically, he's one of them. By showing him among the dead people, I constantly say to the audience, "There's gonna be one more."
That's
You
incredible.
know, so that's the way we unconsciously bring the danger in. You realize a little too late that he's risking his life by just he's not an interpreter. He's gonna be a corpse. He's a fucking corpse. And so basically, he's crawling. So one thing that there is like a compromise to the general tone, and it's part of the script. And I think George likes that. So I mentioned it when I read the script, but then I said it's going to be like that the entire show. I mean, even though there is a serious tone, there is a moment where you're going to have like a cartoon wink to the audience. It's just part of Hollywood basically. And when he falls asleep, it's like suddenly he's falling asleep, he's snoring. So I played along, but for me, I would have shot it serious until the end. That's George. So I knew that George liked that. So we did it. And another thing that George invented, he wanted the actors to speak German, and so basically they could touch the reason why they need an interpreter. If suddenly they were speaking English with a German accent, we understand it. So
Wow.
see, so it's very well thought. I mean, the entire show is like that. You have decisions like that are made, that are clear. It's not that I decide. I didn't decide that. It was with subtitles. It was written, and I could understand why. And another thing that George wanted at the very beginning, and we talked about it, in prep, was that for him, if you spoke English with a French accent, you were speaking French. If you were speaking with a German accent, you were speaking German. So he decided to use the accents instead of the subtitles during the entire show, except for that scene, because there was a reason.
That's a great detail. Moving on though, what was it like having Ben Burt as an editor on this episode, and how much were you involved in post production on this series?
It was great to have Ben Burt. The first time I met him, what I did it was so he smiled. He understood that I knew exactly where it was coming from, and he said the thing is with him is that having him basically, I think it's maybe the first cut that he's doing as a picture director, but he was so good. Knowing that he was my editor, I said, would you mind, Ben, if I was to stay during the sound? Because suddenly I had this incredible opportunity to be the runner of a fantastic sound designer that would design the sound of my episode. And I had finished my director's cut, and the idea is that George then would take over, and I was back home. So he said, "Of course, René. I mean, yeah, you're more than welcome to stay." And so I went to see George and said, "George, I want to do, if you don't mind, to stay. I'm not going to disturb. I'm not going to disturb and do my director's thing. I'm just going to follow it, because sound is the real difference between Europe and the States. It's not the picture, it's sound. Because in Europe, and it was in the 90s, in Europe, there is no sound designer. In Europe, the sound is an illustration of the picture. And when I know that when I give you the pictures, you tell me, thank you for the 50% of the show. That means that you're going to add 50% with the sound. So I want to be here when you do it because I want to learn. And he said, welcome. You can stay, as long as you want. So I stayed. And since I saw them working, I kind of was excited about the work, and I pushed them so hard, into actually doing this and this, and what about this, and what about this. So, and at the end, they got an Emmy for that episode. They got an Emmy of the sound, and Ben called me and said, René, it's because of you. No. It's because of you, because you wanted more and more and more. And at the end, it's your episode that gets the award. But it's, well, you have an award, but I have taken a lesson, a great lesson, and it's going to help me in the movies to come.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. And, moving on to sort of the final scene in this episode, I think it's really fantastic because, talking a little bit about editing, I think you created a very successful montage sequence here, right? So it starts off on this grim and rainy day, right? We see all of the soldiers waiting for the order to attack. And I love how it's symbolically illustrated with those two close-up shots of a chessboard, right? And then, of course, we have Indy's contemplation regarding this decision, right? When you flash back to an earlier scene when Indy was standing behind the field glasses, witnessing this French army get obliterated by these machine guns, right? So, culminating all of this together, what did you want to communicate in this final scene here by having Indy take responsibility into his own hands?
It's like a requiem. And that's exactly what I said to Joe McNally,
Oh, yeah.
the composer, who did a fantastic job, both on Verdun and on Paris. And there are so different scores. The scores are so different, like one is very epic. I said to him, I'm going to shoot a requiem. So why don't you compose a requiem for that moment? And it was fantastic. When I saw what he did, it was incredible. Sometimes you have to trust the talent of other people. I mean, that's what I was explaining earlier, when a writer gives a script to a director, or an actor gives his trust to a director to know if he's going to be good or bad in a movie. You say to your composer, I need a requiem for that scene. So of course, when you give him the cut is already a requiem in pictures. So he can maybe inspire by it. So your job is just try to inspire. What exists in the script is a decision of Indy not to convey the order. That's not something that I made up. It's the end of the script. But the way you go from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, with the unity of the score, the way you go from those soldiers that are waiting under the rain, with even Gaston, who's with them, he's there with his men. You see Colonel Bark with the rain pouring down, because actually his office is in the trenches. So you can see that all those guys are in the mud. They're just not in a castle. They are in the mud. And you go from one set to the next, to the next, to the next, and you have an intercut between those scenes and Young Indy conveying. So it's like suddenly they're waiting for death to come. And so suddenly there is the decision of not being the trigger, which was I was telling you before, as the subject of the show. What is the theme under the show? There is a show, okay, but what is the theme? The theme is that what is the power of one? Is one person can save 10,000? Yes. By what doing? But doing what? Just by not obeying an order.
Yeah, and that trust that you talk about, I think, is really important in a film like this and in a series like this. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that you wanted that requiem, because I think it comes across like that too, especially with the music, and that's not something I think a casual viewer would really think about. So again, I love the attention to detail.
Well, let's move on to your other episode in the series, Paris 1908. But first and foremost, what was it like working with Corey Carrier in this episode? And I guess, how did you want to differentiate his interpretation of Indiana Jones from Sean Patrick Flannery's?
Well, it's the main reason for the difference is the tone. It's so different. It's like a children story, and so basically everything is there is nothing forbidden. You know, it's like when Miss Seymour forbids him to do something, he does something else. When she has to stay in the room, he has to go out. So basically, as a filmmaker, you can have a screwball comedy tone, which was what I was looking for in terms of the kid version of Young Indy, screwball comedy. Because, okay, it's also what we call les années folles in French. The crazy years. Those were the crazy years, les années folles. C'est-à-dire, everybody was kind of, okay? Paris, French, the French cancan, and how suddenly, if you bring a kid into that atmosphere, then, the only way to treat it is screwball comedy, which is a genre, a specific genre. It's not comedy, it's screwball comedy. Basically, two parts for me in the show. One is to follow Young Indy, the version of Corey, very mischievous, so as to have to be as mischievous as he is very invented. The kid is fantastic to work with, and Norman Rockwell, played by Lucas Haas, and I liked so much working with him that I hired him again when he was 18. But there is a second aspect, and it has to do with Picasso.
Going off on what you were saying about Norman Rockwell, I really love the way Indy is able to bond with him in this episode. And, the fact that they were both of a similar age during this time period, it makes their relationship feel very genuine. And it's really nice also to have that contrast. Norman serves as sort of a mentor to Indy in this episode instead of, Indy's tutor, Miss Seymour. So I guess, how do you get the audience invested in these other characters?
Well, again, behind that show, of course, you have George Lucas, who wants the American kids to understand what art is. And by the way, in order to do that, it takes a legend, a star, Picasso, when he's not a star yet. And it takes, at the same time, an American painter, very famous. So it's also Norman Rockwell. America is not on the bench. America is there. And he's studying in the Louvre. And he's trying to follow the school of painting. And so it's not just Indy that gets his lesson. You have somebody who's interested in art, but he also has to take a lesson. Because the way he sees art like a schoolboy, he follows the rules. And so you have somebody who hates art. For him, art is just like awful, like boring stuff, like, Les Miserables,
Great title.
It's kind of obvious, all those mimicking that he's doing, like he's like rolling his eyes and stuff. And you have another kid who's basically following the rules in life and in art. And they both are going to meet someone who doesn't follow the rules, who kind of break the rules. He breaks the rules. And that's Picasso. So Picasso is basically going to be a catalyst for the two kids. And so then the hope, George's hope, is for Picasso to be a catalyst for the American kids, basically telling them, forget the mainstream, forget the mainstream. An artist doesn't have to follow the mainstream. An artist that follows the mainstream is not an artist. Is a technician, is whatever you want to call it, but a creator creates. A creator doesn't follow the rules. It doesn't follow the track. He makes his own track. He makes his own rules, and it's very clear in the episode. Also, what was, and it's part of was written, is that there is, for me, I did a shot to try to convey that. It's when he paints Miss Seymour. He paints Miss Seymour exactly as she would like to be painted. Very classical. And Picasso, if you look at his period bleu, the blue period, or the classical period, is a wonderful, talented drawer. Very, very realistic. I mean, he does things incredible. And it's what he was taught. He was taught that, okay, so he knows how to paint, but it's not his style. And so he paints her knowing that she's not ready to see what Cubism is. He paints her exactly like she feels that a great painter should paint. And then when she likes it, oh, it's absolutely beautiful. He pulls the drawing, and then you have an effect on the screen where you go from one to the next, without any cut, like a flip book, you know. He pulls down the classical version, and there is the Cubist version under.
Right.
And so you have the transformation in the shot. So, you know, my job was to do that, to go from one to the next, like to go from what Picasso was told and what Picasso is in one shot without cuts, you know?
That's really great. I mean, I love what we're seeing when you talk about Picasso like this, and Danny Webb's portrayal of him in this episode. It's so flamboyant and self-assured, yet, you know, he's an incredibly likable character, I think. So I guess, what was it like working with him, recreating this historical figure, and what is your approach to working with actors on set?
I had, of course, watch different interviews or Picasso. We have, you know, Picasso on interviews. Yeah, we have interviews, photos, and stuff. And it was Picasso on the set. The way he moves, he kind of caught that craziness of the character, but at the same time insecurity. And this is what Danny's doing, is like he portrays somebody who's kind of full of himself, but at the same time he's not sure. When the guy doesn't like the painting, he doubts. You know, he has you see in his eyes that he's not sure. All the actors cannot do that. They can go for the track where it's just like crazy. Okay, Picasso is crazy. So you have one note. For the 45 minutes, you have the same note. And so he didn't do that. And for example, one of my favorite scenes, it's when they are in the streets with two kids on the bench, you know, with the market that was abandoned, and, you know, so oranges are left. And so they're on the bench, and he tries to explain to the kids what is art and what he's doing. And the kid, I mean, especially Young Indy, who says, well, when you paint a horse, it doesn't look like a horse. When you paint a lady, it doesn't look like a lady. What he's looking for is not to be a photographer. For example, when he says, I try to give spirit a form. I try to give spirit a form. That means he's not copying the person who's in front of. He's going to interpret it. He's like trying to say, okay, this person is like that. And just after that, he pulls out the handlebar. And I designed the shot, and I worked with Danny, saying, it's not on you that we're going to see the bull. It's the shadow that's going to be the bull.
Right.
Yes.
You're gonna be a crazy motherfucker with a handlebar on your head. But on the wall, which is the canvas, we're gonna see the bull. Young Indy is gonna recognize the bull because he look at the shadow. He doesn't look at you. You know. So this is directing, really, for me. That is, the scene is written, the dialogue is written. So what do I do with that? How do I convey the idea that how can I show the audience what Picasso sees? And this is a good way for me to actually see what he sees, because it's a thought. So how can you picture a thought? It's like a way of conveying the idea that the painter is not a photographer. The painter is. There is a moment where he says, "You might not see the horse, definitely see the wildness." And when this was written on the script, I said, how do I illustrate that? I'm going to see him looking at his girl, and I'm going to track in toward the girl, who's the wildness, And so basically you understand how we think also, because you have the relationship between the painter and the muse. And Fernand was the muse of Picasso. I mean, one of his muse,
Right, and I love the way that you're talking about all these things because, I noticed a lot of these details, and the question always came up, why is it that way, or how do you think about it this way? And so to understand that there's always a purpose behind everything, that's always, I feel like, a very George Lucas and Steven Spielberg type of way of directing, and I feel like you really matched what they tried to do, and I think you can see why these episodes are so strong. And so continuing on with more characters, I mean, we talked about Edgar Degas a little bit already, but he's another great addition to this episode because, ironically enough, despite the fact that they're both artists, right, he's somewhat of an adversary for Picasso. And so in what ways did you try to emphasize their conflicting philosophies about art, and how important was that to the story?
Degas was basically breaking the rules beforehand. When everybody was doing classical stuff, he was breaking the rules by saying, I don't need to see the end of the table. I'm going to frame half of the table out. Or I'm not going to show perfect skin on the ladies of my painting. He was not polishing the stuff. He was trying to have the painting sweat. And so this guy is an old guy now. And of course, he has become the establishment. And Picasso is the one who's breaking the rules. And so you have, again, an artist breaking the rules that is now famous. And so he thinks that his way is the only way.
Right.
And he cannot recognize the talent of Picasso because it's changing so much what for him painting is, that suddenly he cannot. And he should be the one. He should be the one that says, this guy is the guy now. He should be the one because he's one of them. Same group, like breaking rules as a metaphor about people who tells you what art is, what is good, what is bad, censorship in art. It was a good way of telling that to the audience, to the youngsters, saying that how come somebody who's a creator suddenly becomes a critic. He becomes a critic, and he was an artist. He becomes a critic because suddenly he say this is good, this is bad. So I think that was interesting in the show, to try to convey that.
I'm curious because at the end of the episode, when Degas signs the painting, he says to Indy that it's not his pigment. So basically, he's telling him he knows it isn't his, but he signs it anyway. Do you know why he still signs it?
It's a way of, for me, it's a way. I don't know if it's that what they meant when they actually did that, but because it was in the script. For me, it's a way for Degas to recognize Picasso without saying it. It's like, it's not the pigment I would use, but, it's a Degas. When he says, I could do what you do in your sleep, my sleep.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he does it. So of course he doesn't use the same pigment because he's using, and I like, also when he says, and now I'm going to do it exactly as he does, from memory.
Yeah.
and he puts the thing in. So basically, he draws without having a model. So he is getting closer to Degas because the model is not even here. He has in mind the Degas paintings that he has seen, and of course, Picasso knew every other painter. I mean, he was curious of everything, so he knows exactly how he paints, and so when he does it from memory, it's even closer to a Degas. But of course, he's not going to use the same painting, the same pigment, and I think it's good that the guy was half blind at the end. We know that the guy was half blind, and actually I have foreshadowed that in the episode. I don't know if you remember, but there is a moment where that when he tries to find his cane, there is a close shot where actually we see his hands and he's trying to find the cane and
Yeah.
and the hat, and we see that he doesn't see. So the audience knows that he has a high sight problem before actually somebody says it in the show. I basically foreshadowed that. It was not in the script, but I think that you cannot discover a blind person at the end. He has to be blind before. There was that shot at that moment where we could see actually that Degas had this problem. When he sees the painting of Picasso and when he throws the glass of wine and he says, I made it better.
Yeah.
At that time, he cannot recognize that those elements is actually a painting. But when he actually sees that this youngster is able to paint like him, even if he doesn't use the same pigment, it's a way of giving him a medal in a way, to sign.
Let's jump back to sort of Indy real quick. There's this sequence, we talked a little bit about it earlier, where he escapes from the hotel into the streets of Paris. And I love it. I think it's one of those moments that really illustrates some nice distinctive style. How did you go about, recreating this unique atmosphere of Paris at this time? And, how much, I guess, of this episode was actually shot in Paris?
Actually, most of the episode was shot in Prague. Prague is like the little sister of Paris. I mean, it's the same architect. So basically, we could find, more controllable locations that we shouldn't have found in Montmartre. Who's like very touristic. But most of the scenes, exterior and interior, were shot in Prague. We managed to find our own little Montmartre, and we closed off the streets and filmed there because we actually need to control. I needed completely control of an entire street because the camera needed to basically it was supposed to happen in 1908, so I had to control everything, and I chose a street that is not straight, that goes around, so basically I don't have to have a full perspective, going miles and miles. I can control the thing without having to control the city. The shots in which you see the sights of Paris were actually filmed by a second unit. And in fact, Rick was usually the one who shot them. He knew exactly what we needed, We even discussed it before. But for the directors, it was very reassuring to know that after we had moved on, Rick would still be there to complete, what needed to be complete. And of course, we needed some views of Paris. It's impossible to do otherwise. So we needed the Eiffel Tower, we needed Notre Dame, but very few was actually done in Paris.
So there's a graveyard scene and Rousseau's ghost story, and they both, are good examples of that goofball comedy you were talking about. But how essential are they for this episode's overall story?
Well, they're not essential. The thing is that when I read the script, there was Pimp 1 and Pimp 2. Those were two extras that were supposed to be, casted in Prague. So we did some casting, and I was not happy with the result. And I went to Rick and I said, Rick, those guys, there is Pimp 1 and Pimp 2, but they're very important in the show if we want to continue to convey the idea of the crazy night for Young Indy. For me, they are closer to Dickens characters, Charles Dickens characters. It's you find those type of characters in David Copperfield, for example. They are like incarnation of what could go bad, bad influences for a kid. And so I said, I'm not going to find those guys in Prague. So why don't I cut down the extras to create, enough money so we can hire two British Shakespearean actors that are going to come from one day and they're going to do the deal because they're going to be brilliant. Because they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. They will know exactly, And he said, okay, so we do that. We cut the extras. So, he didn't say, okay, I give you more money. No, it was a deal, It was a deal. But René, the good thing is I couldn't be able, you know what? I give you the phone number of Nina Gold. You got to call Nina Gold. And Nina Gold is the goddess of casting. Even today, she's doing all the shows, everything they show that the Game of Thrones, The Crown. I mean, she's the key casting director in London. She knows everyone. She knows all the talents, and she continues to go and chase for new talent. I give a call to Nina Gold, and I explain to her exactly what I'm looking for. And I don't have time to see, it's going to shoot tomorrow. So they have to come tomorrow. It's going to shoot in 2 days. So I don't have time to have them audition or something. I have to trust Nina, saying I'm going to tell her exactly what I need. And I said, I need Shakespearean actors. I need people that are easy. I explained it's Pimp 1 and Pimp 2. So they're not going to have a lot of lines. I need like killers. People who come and that tell them that it's like a silent movie. It's a silent movie. We're going to need what they can bring to the scenes, but they're not going to have lines. And she says, I know exactly who I'm going to send. And she sent Craig Crosby and Gary Whelan. Like two incredible actors, British actors, fantastic. And I met them at the bar, the night before, the bar of the hotel. And I told them exactly what I was looking for. And they were so good that it emphasized the time, the screen time, because they were fantastic, So they became characters, and on the script it was Pimp 1 and Pimp 2, but it became characters because of their talent and what they were supposed to bring.
That's a really great story and interesting things, small details like that I wouldn't have picked up on. And I think too, they add to this overall comic relief and farcical implication of this episode that, has such a serious statement about art, but then also really conveys that atmosphere as well, especially of the Belle Epoque and everything like that. And, speaking of attention to detail, something you talked about a little bit earlier about this episode is how everyone manages, to learn something from each other, right? Indy becomes invested in art after his original dismissal of it, right? Miss Seymour becomes captivated by Picasso's talent, right? And even Norman kind of gets back at, Picasso by selling his sketch that, Picasso even signed as one of his own, right? So, holistically, what theme or lesson did you want the audience to take away from this episode?
It's my goal as a director was all along to illustrate Picasso's line when he says, I try to give spirit a form. I mean, that's what I try to do with my own film.
Wow.
I try to give spirit a form. To talk about the importance of breaking the rules, for example. An artist shouldn't follow the pre-existing track. That's what I said before. He should stay away from the mainstream. Degas broke the rules before becoming the establishment. And now he falls into the trap of thinking that there is no other way than his way. He doesn't realize that Picasso is just doing exactly what he did before. That is, breaking the rules, reinventing the way of seeing things,
What was the most challenging scene for you to film?
Uh, Two scenes, one for each movie. The battle scene in Verdun, because it was not supposed to be shot. And so the pressure was very high for me to actually get it right. So Rick would be proud of me, and he would the trust he had put in me would be fulfilled. So that was, important and very challenging. And I had one day to do it, so it was kind of crazy. And I wanted to do. I didn't want to cut. I wanted to shot in scene sequences, not scene sequence like a aesthetic move. You don't want like, oh, it's a scene sequence. No, I wanted to be able for the soldiers to be in the trenches, so to speak, and to explode at the same time. And we actually made something up because there was no special effects at the time of that level in terms of CGI. So all the explosions are real explosions. And so the thing we design is that with Simon Crane and a great pyrotechnic guru that came from England, and they used to work with Simon, because Simon came and he was not even aware of that fact, because we had decided, to not to do stock shots but to actually shoot it. And he said, René, what do you have in mind? And I said, I want to shoot scene sequences. Oh, so it's an artistic move? No, it's a narrative move. I want to have the soldiers involved really on the battlefield, charging with the takes that will take 20 seconds without a cut, for example, with all the pyrotechnics rigged, and with the Steadicam moving at the level of the deads. That's what I want as master shots. And then I'm going to, of course, do, all the cuts and stuff inside. But I want master shots that are like 20 seconds long at least, with everything rigged. And he said to me, but René, you know that in between takes? Yes, I know in between takes it will take 20 minutes to rig again. And I don't care. But I will have those shots and in perspective, because think about it. I was in Prague. I was in front of the studio. My back in the studio, Barendorf studio, was in my back. And all the day I had like backlight and side light, because of the compass I had looked, and I showed Rick that the north was the studio. So if I was at the level of the ground, I wouldn't see Prague, I wouldn't see the pillar of electricity, I wouldn't see the freeway. But I was in Prague. If you look at that scene, I am in Prague. I'm not in a field somewhere. I am in the middle of the city, which is incredible. And the other one, and you're going to love that. It's a scene which is not part of the show.
Oh, wow.
But it took me half a day of shooting. I had looked at photos and illustrations from les années folles, Paris, Montmartre, the cabaret, and all that stuff. And I found out that in those crazy times, in some cabaret, they were having chimpanzees in smoking, serving champagne to the ladies.
What?
Chimps, wearing tuxedos, serving champagne to the ladies. I saw the illustration. So I said I came to the set with the book, and I said, Rick, look at that. And I showed him the chimpanzees with the, And René, you're not going to tell me that we're going to have chimpanzees? Yes, yes, exactly. It's exactly what I'm telling you. I mean, think of the shots. Are you sure? Well, it's worth a try. He called me back and said, René, I found a trainer. He has the chimps, so he's going to train them because, of course, they have to learn. We have like 15 days, and during those 15 days, they're going to train them. So see, at the same time, nothing is impossible with Rick. So you have to think of the bonus that you have when you are director on that show. If you have that guy, or if you don't have that guy, it's not the same show. And so you remember the scene where there is the fight in the cabaret. They're fighting, and the plane, and the pimp one and pimp two, they ask for this is my girl. Where are you two? You stole my girl. You remember that?
Yeah.
So that scene was not supposed to be that. That scene was supposed to take place in the same place with the ladies that are at the tables and stuff, and you used to have like two chimpanzees serving champagne to the ladies. So the day comes, and so for this I asked 2 other cameras, okay, because I wanted to be sure, I could have the shots. So my 4 cameras are there, and we're gonna shoot first the chimps, because we feel that they're gonna go crazy, and we're not gonna be able to shoot. So we light the scene. It's a small opera in Prague. It's a wonderful small opera, like a small Garnier. It's magnifique. It's magnificent. So everything is set. The ladies, beautiful. The camera, the dolly, everything is ready. And then we bring the chimps with the trainer. And so we put the chimps on the tables, because they were supposed to, serve on the tables. And they had been trained like that. And then, before I can say roll camera, the chimps pull the tablecloth. And so you have all the drinks, the bottles, everything that goes to the roof. And suddenly they it's like Tarzan, they just tear their tuxedos, like tear their tuxedos, and they poop on the table, on the ladies. They go crazy, completely crazy. They ruin the entire scene, and everybody was like frozen. And then I turned to the guys and said, "You actually shot this, right?" nobody shot this.
No.
No one. And no, it's the best shot in all my career. I have it in my mind because I see it. It's just incredible. It took us 2 hours to actually clean the mess. And so when the mess was cleaned, Rick came to me and said, "René, you know what? The most incredible thing I've ever seen, but it's not on tape. And at the end of the day, we're not going to have another, half day to actually get the scene. Now it's your job. I did mine. I brought the chimps and the tuxedos. And now it's your turn, René. You have to finish the day and make it work. And it has to be wonderful. And nobody has to know about this except you and me." So I said, "Yeah, fair enough. We're going to do it. So what are you going to do it?" I said, like a Western, a fight in a saloon. That's what we're going to do. And so that's exactly what we did, and the fact I had Pimp 1 and Pimp 2 with those 2 wonderful actors as well, we could improvise something, but we had everything to make it work. We had the dancers, we have, the extras, we had to get rid of some clothes because, the green poop was terrible. That was terrible. But at the end of the day, we did the thing with the plane, it was something like screwball comedy.
Yeah.
So that was the other challenging moment.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. And, on that topic, do you have any other deleted scenes or things that you'd be willing to share?
No, I mean, I've nothing that beats that,
And I would have loved to have you, work on the other episode set in France, which was Paris 1916. This was the infamous, love affair between Indy and Mata Hari, which ironically enough actually got paired with Verdun 1916 to form that DVD episode, Demons of Deception. With your connection, being a French director, was there ever discussion about the possibility of having you direct that episode?
No, actually, because I directed the two others back to back. The way it was designed, it was like one director was shooting while one was prepping the next. So Simon, for example, shot after me, so I could see him. Uh, but we were doing like one after the other. Really, it was a never-ending shooting for the crew. And while I was prepping my shoot, for example, uh, another director was shooting his episode. And when I was shooting, the following director was starting his prep, and so on. There was always two crews at work. I remember that Simon Windsor, he lent me some dollars because my wife, Marie, was about to give birth. And I had to leave in the night, rent a car to cross the Alps and catch a flight in Munich that would allow me to get in Paris as early as possible because she called me and say I'm going to deliver. So it was a real indie adventure, by the way.
Right.
Crossing the Alps during the night, and it was crazy because it was like snowing. I said I'm never going to make it. I'm going to die here, And in fact, when I got to France, it turned out to be a false alarm.
Oh.
But there was this complicity as well. We were not on the set, and Rick told me, "Don't worry, René, you're gonna be in Paris." And so he organized everything with Munich and stuff, rent a car so I could go at night. I mean, all that also. It was not just on the set. It was like family.
And moving on to a different topic now, you talk a lot about Spielberg as well, who I know you mentioned recommended you for this show. Did he ever work with you on this series specifically, or was it just Lucas and Rick McCallum?
No, it was just Lucas and Rick McCallum because at the time he was involved. I guess it was between Hook and the Schindler's List. It was during that time where he was at the same time prepping one and shooting the other. I mean, this guy, I don't know how he does, but that's what he was doing. And so I had worked with him on another project, which was the first one before actually Kathleen Kennedy told George Lucas about me. I was working on the first project that he had on Tintin.
Oh,
really?
Wow.
It was the Autocar Scepter. It was a wonderful script by Melissa Matheson, the screenwriter of E.T., and she had done an adaptation of this adventure of Tintin, the Autocar Scepter. And so basically, maybe because of my background, also French, basically Kathleen Kennedy said, I found a guy for Tintin, and at the time. Too bad they lost the rights because the wife of Hergé, the creator of Tintin, is crazy.
Really?
So, I mean, basically
Wow.
his entire life to try to get those rights. And when they actually did Indiana Jones, it was also because they couldn't do Tintin,
Wow.
Wow. That's really cool that you said that because I have always loved the Tintin movie that he did eventually do. And I was kind of wondering, what did you think about that film? And do you ever think he'll get around to making a sequel to it?
Yeah, well, yes, I loved it. And I had to actually, I saw it in the original version, of course, but I had to go and see the French version because I couldn't stand having the dog called Snowy and not Milou,
Yeah.
and because of course as a kid I was just like reading them in French. So for the first time, I had to go and see again a film, dubbed, in order to get the feel right. But incredible the job that he did. In every single movie of his, the bad ones and the good ones, there are some bad ones, very few, but there is always a lesson. There is always a shot. It's like finding shots. It's incredible the way it sees, even with no money. When you just look at Duel, or you look at the introduction shot of Jaws, when you see what he had as the prop, for the shark, it's crazy. When the cop is inside his office, the way the camera is moving, the way he blocks the scene in one shot without cuts,
Well, the last question here, as you reminisce about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, now, 30 years later, what did you take away from the experience, and what impact has the show had on you as a filmmaker and as a person?
Well, I met some amazing people on Young Indy, you know. Rick McCallum, first of all, who has remained a close friend. We have seen each other since many times according to our professional schedules. At Paramount, when they were doing the camera tests for episode one, while the technicians were adjusting the new camera, we talked for hours outside. I've also stayed in touch with Gavin Bouquet, Young Indy's production designer, who we correspond regularly by email, give me some news, give me some news. David Tattersall, too, the gentleman of lighting, or Simon Crane, the stunt coordinator for Young Indy and Braveheart, Titanic, and The Mummy, and so many things, whom I see each time I am in London. Several times it was on the 007 stage in Pinewood, where I was doing some stunts or directing second unit for different movies. It's important to have very talented people that can make things better, make things it's a collaborative work. It's not like a painter who paints his own canvas. A film is adding up talents, and someone has signed the film at the end, but he signed the film exactly like the guy is signing the painting he didn't actually paint.
Wow.
There are all people who virtually started the careers on this series. They had done 2 or 3 shoots before, a few commercials. Some had graduated from film school. And so it was a great training ground for all of us.
Well, René Manzor, thank you so much for joining us today for this incredible interview. I loved hearing all of these stories and hearing your philosophies about directing and everything that you contributed to this phenomenal show. I mean, I'm definitely have an entirely different perspective on this show after our conversation together. Thank you so much for doing this. This was absolutely incredible.
Well, thank you for having me and for loving this show. That was an incredible, souvenir for many people around the globe.
Yeah, well, I think that about wraps up today's episode, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time listening and you enjoyed today's episode, consider subscribing to our podcast, leaving a review, telling other people what you think about the show. You can also visit our website, www.theindianajonesuniverse.com. And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can find us on Twitter at the Indie Universe. So thanks so much for joining us, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Once again, I'm Elijah.
And I'm Will.
And I'm René Manzor, and until next time, so long, Dr. Jones.